and very warm welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here. For those people who don't know who you are, tell us a bit about who you are and what your business is all about.
So I'm Hannah, and I co-own two businesses. So we have Bonnie and Clyde Wedding Boutique, and we also have Bonnie and Clyde Design Studio, and I own both of those businesses with my husband. They say you should never work with your husband, but you know.
Little shout out to Toby there as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Where did the name Bonnie and Clyde? I mean, I think I can probably guess, but like, how did you come up with that one?
Probably after quite a few wines in the pub. So we knew it had to be a couple.
Yeah.
And you could run through millions and millions of couples. But we also wanted it to have a little edge to it as well. So Bonnie and Clyde just kind of came to mind after about 5 hours. But we also tweaked the name Bonnie because that often gets spelt incorrectly. People will email us with the IE rather than the Y.
Yeah.
So the Bonnie change of name was kind of Bonnie meaning pretty. So yeah, there was it was just it had to be a couple, and it had to be some couple with a bit of an edge to it.
Oh,
So
I
that's
love
where
that.
it came from.
I love that. So tell us about your journey into wedding stationery, because I don't know many people that, you know, at the tender age of 16 said, when I grow up, I'm going to X. So how did you get there?
Through the back door is probably the fastest answer to that. Randomly. You're completely right. That was not on the agenda. I'd always wanted to be a teacher. So when I went to uni, that was the intention. I went to Bristol University to do an English degree. And I think although I always knew I wanted to be a teacher, I was very much kind of obsessed with design on the kind of side, as it were. So I'm not a graphic designer. I say that a lot within our kind of social media. I don't pretend to be a graphic designer. But I've always been fascinated by it, and fascinated by the way things are kind of curated together, design details that I'm absolutely obsessed by, interiors, all of those things. So yeah, like I say, I went to uni, did my degree, went into teaching, and I was there for 14 years as a primary school teacher. And the job became very different to what I thought it was going to be. And actually, in the end, made me quite, I think just felt very unfulfilled. And I knew that the design and the creative part of my brain was just not being utilised in the slightest. And of course, I had a husband who was a graphic designer and has been a designer for years. And we just sat down one day and said, what about if we just combine our skills and see if we can do this, see if we can have a go. And that's kind of how it came about. But at the same time as teaching, I was also trying to grow the wedding business. And that was really tricky. Balancing sort of both of those aspects. So I'd be teaching and then I'd be like running into the toilet at lunchtime and trying to answer like inquiries and respond to brides who want things now.
Yeah.
Quite rightly. So that was really tricky. So there was a big crossover between actually sitting down and saying, I can't do both. I've got to just leave and let's just go for it and try it and see if we can make this work. But it was scary. Very, very scary.
Gosh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I knew you were a teacher. We had some discussion about that online. But yeah, I've never really thought, because most people have a job that, even though it's a juggle, you kind of to and fro, but being a teacher is a whole different ball game, because you can't quickly reply to an email during PE class or during
you really
maths.
Yeah, and when there's, you know, proofs of stationery going backwards and forwards, you can't, like you say, sit and kind of look at that in detail and then respond. So I would do that when I got home, and it all just became completely all consuming. And I went to speak to the head teacher and I just said, I'm kind of out. I can't do this anymore. And it was the right time. Teaching had become something very, very different to what I had imagined. And actually, it just made sense. It's something we talked about for years, and just thought, let's just take the bull by the horns and crack on. And I remember, like, prior to sort of taking the leap, it was probably about 3 years before I left, I had some stationery designs that we'd been working on, and I was looking at them thinking, what am I going to do with these? Like, how am I going to get us out here and get our name out there? And I took this little box of stationery to this woman who owned a shop down the road from us, and she was a wedding stylist, but she actually had a shop as well. And I sort of knocked on the door and wandered in and said, hi, I'm Hannah. We create wedding stationery. Just wondered if you wanted to take a look. I don't actually know what I expected her to say. Like, she was a stylist. She didn't know me, and she looked through it, and then kind of 5 minutes later said, would you like to do a shoot with me? And that was it. And then from there, it just went crazy. But yeah, I remember that time so vividly, thinking, can this ever like go anywhere? Can it ever become anything? So that was something that came to mind last night, actually.
Well, crazy. we know the answer. It did go somewhere. It did become something. Do you look back on that time, because it's a process that a lot of us go through, isn't it? That moment where you have to take the leap. Do you look back and think, crikey, Hannah, well done you girl for doing that and taking that leap, because you had to be brave, you had to be patient, you had to show courage. Do you look back and think, good on you, girl?
Yeah, I think I do more so now. I think at the time you are very sort of cautious about how this is going to play out. And although everybody around you is saying, Hannah, this was meant to be, my friends and family particularly, who know how they know how my brain works in terms of sort of that creative aspect, have said for years, you are wasted, like, doing something that isn't making you happy. But at the time, I think you are so fearful. Now I look back and think, yeah, bloody hell, like, I did just think, come on, let's just do it. And I think what I always had in the back of my mind was, let's just give it a year. What's the worst that can happen, as my mum always says? Yes. If I need to go back into teaching, then okay, I'll bite the bullet and do that. So I never thought too far ahead, because I think when you do that, you absolutely freak yourself out. And then a year went by, and I was like, oh, a year's passed. And then it's 2 years, and then it's like, oh, wait, we've done it. So yeah,
we arrived.
We're still here.
Drawing in then the web and brand design that you do, because I've seen some of your work and it's beautiful. How did you sort of organize where you put your time with obviously Toby's experience, your desire? Which came first? How did it work?
So I think when I was thinking about this the other day, the stationery definitely came first, because we designed the wedding stationery for my sister's wedding. And during that process, bearing in mind my sister, I mean, I'm detail driven, but crikey, like, I mean, we're on a parallel, but wow, like, it's next level. So, but doing it was brilliant, because it allowed us to go through the process that we would go through with a couple and use them as sort of like a test. So the stationery came first, and we loved doing that, and that was brilliant. And then Toby was working in a very corporate design. He was the in-house designer for a kind of corporate agency, and he hated it. And it just kind of killed his soul completely. So again, he had to make the decision to go freelance whilst I was still teaching. And whilst he was freelancing, he kept getting asked quite a lot about web and brand design. And it wasn't actually anything he'd done in his previous role. So he just taught himself. And I used to kind of watch him over his shoulder and think, oh, kind of, that looks like fun. Like, I want to have a go at that. And would sort of see what he was doing. And I remember one day thinking, well, I can't build a website, and I'm not a graphic designer, and I'm not a brand designer, but I can see why certain things are working together nicely and why other things just don't work. And so I thought, yeah, I want a bit of piece of that. So he's taught me so much. And now we really do work kind of side by side. The technical side of what he does, I leave to him. But we do stay in our lanes when it comes to how we work. We know what we need to kind of focus on from our own strengths. But balancing is hard. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
What, like branding, you know, because I talk about branding a lot. And, you know, just looking at my own businesses, when I've hit the spot on brand, it changes everything. It's not an exaggeration to say that. So from your perspective and your experience, why specifically for people who run wedding businesses do you think that branding is so important?
Gosh, it's such a big, like you say, brand design is such a huge area. And I think for the wedding business, the wedding industry is very unique in the way that it's people brand their businesses, but in the industry itself is unique. So it's not like going into a supermarket and buying food or going and buying a washing machine. When you are a couple and you are buying something from a supplier, you're buying a whole experience and you're buying a relationship with that person. It's completely unique in that sense. And it's one of the most important days of their life. So they need to know and trust in what you do, and they need to make a connection with you. And I often think if that brand element is not right and it's not been nailed, like you were saying, particularly in the wedding industry, that's where that connection really falls down for a couple. And they don't have anything in which to hook their day on or their kind of sense of excitement, because that whole element's missing. So I think it's really, really important in all industries, but the wedding industry in particular, if your branding is not working, it can have a really detrimental effect, I think, on your business.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think it's one of the areas that so many people don't realize is so important.
Yes, you know, definitely.
When you start a business, if you're not, you know, naturally a designer or naturally, you know, you don't naturally gravitate towards that side of your business, I think you can miss a trick.
Completely.
What do you think are the most common mistakes people make when it comes to branding their wedding business?
Okay, so I really thought long and hard about this because I think there's quite a few mistakes, and I do think you could really get on your soapbox about it, but I won't do that. But I think I kind of got it down to sort of 5 key mistakes that I think that people make and why that happens. So I think the first one is that when you are first starting out in any business, but particularly in the wedding business, and you know that you have to get something out there. So it's kind of like, I've got to get a logo and I've got to bang it out on Instagram quickly because, you know, people need to see me on social media. So what that then becomes is that the whole brand becomes very visual, but it's got no voice behind it. So you can often see that people will spend the time maybe creating a logo in Canva or, you know, wherever, putting it out there, but they don't have anything to say about the brand. So they don't understand necessarily that their brand is them. So there's no voice behind it. So what you then just see is maybe lots of sort of visual elements to the brand, but there's no ethos coming through. There's no belief system coming through. There's no real sense of what you stand for, because branding and brand identity are so tied together. So you can get the brand element and think, oh, I've got all the logo, I've got this, I've got that, but there's no sense of you coming through it. And I think that I see that such a lot, and it's one of those things that grows and evolves over time, and it's not something that you would just be able to suddenly say, woo, I've got a brand. You know, it takes such a long time, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it's not it's not a linear process. You don't start here and finish it here and then we're all done forever.
Exactly.
The brand evolves, like you say. Absolutely. You don't ever get there and put your feet up and think, well, I never really have to worry about branding again.
Yeah, exactly. And I was talking to Toby about this the other day, because I think often as well with branding a wedding business is you kind of forget about the groom in the process. So lots of us who work in the wedding industry, I know, are female, but we are selling a service to a couple. You know, there's often going to be a man involved in that. And Toby so often says, when we were looking at supplies for our own wedding, so I can't just look at that logo and say, oh right, okay, well let's go and buy the flowers from there, or let's go and hire this photographer. I need to see more. I need to feel a connection, because otherwise I feel like I'm not even part of this process. I feel like I might as well just leave it all to you. So I think that's the key. The first mistake that I see people making is taking themselves out of their brand and allowing that, thinking that is just going to do it for them. And it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. No. So number 2 was, I'm going back to my notes here. Number 2 was not investing in your branding. And I think that's really tricky, again, when you're first starting, because it's not necessarily going to be a priority. And I think what can sometimes happen when you don't pass that over, if it's not within your skill set, is that it's a bit like, for example, I am rubbish at baking. Like, I'm just crap at it, really bad. So I would go out, I know I want a cake, but I know I'm not going to be able to do it very well. So I'll go and buy like a ready-made cake mix, and I'll be eating it thinking, well, it's okay, but it's not great. It's a bit like that when you do your own branding. It's kind of, it'll do, it's fine. It kind of work for now, but it's just not hitting the mark. And I don't know whether people often fully understand a designer's process. So
I don't think, unless you've been through it, I think it's very easy to assume that it's not something you need.
Absolutely.
And I consider myself to be a really creative person. I wasn't very good at art at school because I can't draw. I love particular parts of creativity, like making my house look nice. I like interior design. But when it comes to designing a brand, honestly, I've tried, and it's not something in my skill set. I think it's a process that I'm not capable of. And when you go through it and you're being asked questions about, your story and the words you use and the colors and, things that inspire you, think, well, how do we weave that in?
Weave that in.
But a good designer does exactly that, right?
It is. It's about going back to that first step about, like you just said, about the holistic view of it, and then how you incorporate that into a graphic, essentially. And I think if you're trying to do that yourself, that's very difficult to do. So I think not investing, I understand why that happens, but I do sometimes think, it's really important.
Huge.
And also that kind of leads on to number 3, which is when you don't think about your branding in context. So you may have actually you may have done a really good job of creating your own primary logo, the one that is seen in most spaces. But then you don't realize it doesn't work on other platforms, and it doesn't work within Instagram. And then of course on Facebook it's different, and then on your website it will be different. And then you'll also need to extrapolate certain elements of it to sit here or there, and that it doesn't work when you try and do it with one. It's really, really tricky. I mean, you'll know with your branding that you will have so many different variations of it within so many different places.
Absolutely. And I think that you're absolutely right. When you think about, I don't know, let's choose a brand. I always choose John Lewis, but let's go with John Lewis. The logo that you see above the door when you walk in isn't the same logo that you see on the bag that they give you when you buy your shopping. It's not the same logo on the napkin in the cafe in John Lewis. It's all of those things, and having that experience of a brand,
Mm-hmm.
when subconsciously is a very powerful thing. Like you don't know until you actually consciously think about it, but it's happening all the time with
all the time.
brands.
Yeah, completely. And I think if you don't think about it in every context as well, you also forget, again, I was talking to Toby about this earlier, you forget about the website side of it. So you can think that you've actually created a brand package, and then the website ends up looking so far removed because those other woven elements that work through it are missing. And I think sometimes people view their website as a separate entity, and it isn't. You know, it's one entire thing, isn't it? It's one big package. So number 4, I would say another mistake people often make with the branding is it's too literal. So they think about what they sell or the service that they sell, and then they feel like they need to incorporate that into their brand design. So imagery, I think, in brand design is a really tricky thing to get right, and it isn't always necessary. So just because you sell or create cakes does not mean that you need to have a cake in your logo, because I mean it can work beautifully, but it's also unnecessary in many senses. So I think we can get too caught up in, I must have a picture of what I do within my branding. So that would be my 4th one.
That's a really good point, that last one. And I like, going back, I don't know that I think early on I hadn't really fully understood that. And actually, when you find the common ground between you and your ideal client, that might not be anything to do with what you do, how you do it. Like, for example, my common ground with my clients from my coaching business is often travel, because I love travel, I love culture, and if I go and look at the people that I work with, usually that's the common space. Well, that's got nothing to do with my business as a business coach.
Completely.
But it has an impact in my color scheme and the layout of my website.
Of course it does.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think the final thing I think that people often do when they're creating a brand for themselves is they put so much pressure on themselves to make it on trend.
Yes.
And I see it such a lot, as particularly noticed with wedding stationery, particularly, that there's definitely an emerging trend coming through, which is appearing sort of everywhere. And I look at that and I think I just don't know how that lasts the test of time. And I'm not saying for a second that your brand identity that you create in 2012 is the one that you're going to use 10 years later, because you won't. You know, it does change and it does evolve. But I think we do put too much pressure on ourselves to look at kind of what's out there, who's doing what. I need to make sure that I have that colour in my logo, and that needs to go on the website, and that font. And then you lose all sense of yourself and you become really confused. Your brand is so confused. So I think they're kind of, for me, they were the sort of 5 key things.
Oh, I love those. Thank you. And just to tune into that final point that you made, when your capability as a business owner doesn't include brand design, and I would include myself in that, it's so easy to be the green-eyed monster about other people's brands. And completely. See things. I remember just after going through one of my rebrands, I saw someone else's website and I was like, oh, but hang on, that brand's really pretty, and mine doesn't look like that. And it was when everything was rose gold.
Oh God, yeah.
And I saw this brand, I was like, oh, but I really like that. And I had to go back to the drawing board of, hang on, my brand is based on me.
On you.
And the way I do business and the people that I do business with. And it's that will stand the test of time, not me trying to emulate someone else's brand, right?
Oh, completely. And I think what you just said then about it being about you, there are a few people I follow on Instagram, and I'm thinking now about the stories. And if you are watching stories and they're flying past, you don't often know who's posted the story because you don't always look in that top corner to see who it is because they're flying past and you're just scrolling. There are a few people who I don't even need to know I know who has posted that story because I can tell in their voice. I can tell in the way that they talk to you. I can tell that the messages that they put across are so consistent that I don't even need to look at who, because they built that connection with me. And that's not just about a pretty logo. It's not just about a pretty Instagram feed, as you know, and you say this, I know, lots. It's so much more than that. It's so much more about who you are, what you do, why you do it, and how you do it differently, and about you, essentially.
Absolutely. And moving on to that idea about the impact that a good brand can have, is it, I mean, I'm sure it's multifaceted, but is it about connection? Yeah,
100%. If it's right, I can build a connection with you without ever meeting you, because I can hear you, I can see you, I get you. There's a level of, like we said before, a level of trust involved, because it's consistent and I get it. And I think when a brand is confused and those messages aren't consistent, I kind of buy out of it. I'm kind of stepping away. I think there's examples of when I've bought something from someone, not necessarily in the wedding industry, but if I've bought something online, particularly on Instagram, I can see what I'm buying because I can see it all over their Instagram. I can see the photos of what they produce. I know that I'm already fine with that. I get it. But there's always something else that I need to tip me over to like the buying place.
Yeah.
There's something I kind of need to sort of take me over the line. And often it will be a message that they're giving out or a vibe that I get from them.
Yeah.
And that kind of takes me to the next step. And amazing branding will do that.
You're so right. You're so right. I'm thinking of a recent experience of buying scrunchies.
Oh,
I know.
I love it.
It's so they're back on trend. So my 10-year-old daughter tells me.
I love it.
I mean, they just feel so 80s to me.
Yeah.
But they're back on trend, and I had to buy some for her. And like, you can go to the pound shop and buy a scrunchie, and it will be a very transactional thing. Then we found an exceptionally cool supplier of scrunchies on Instagram.
Okay.
And suddenly the experience of buying changes.
Yes.
And everything changes with it, doesn't it?
Yeah,
like
completely.
The experience, the brand loyalty, the connection, and the amount that you're willing to pay for a scrunchie changes massively.
Completely.
Suddenly you're looking at scrunchies. I mean, I haven't, because I haven't been in a shop for like a year, but 1 minute you're looking at a transaction of, here's my £1, I will take that scrunchie from you, over here to an artisan crafter of scrunchies who uses locally crafted materials, posts things with free packaging, with nice labels. They all have names. The colours have names that I connect with.
This sounds fabulous.
And suddenly you're paying £10 for a scrunchie instead of your £1 over here.
Yeah.
What was it that did that? It was the brand.
Yeah, completely. And I think that's another thing, like you just said, if you have your branding right and you take the time to really get to the crux, really dig deep in what you do and what you're about, if you can nail it, then you can charge your worth. And I think there's a difference between people coming and looking at comparing and contrasting two suppliers and looking at their brands and thinking, do you know what, these are the people because they instill confidence in me. And weak branding will really kind of drive that sort of connection down, because they don't feel like they can they don't have the confidence in what you do.
Yeah.
So like you've just said, it's so important to get that element right, particularly in our industry where we're building that trust all the time. Definitely.
Absolutely. So let's head back to stationery for a minute. Tell me what your favorite ever stationery design was that you created.
Okay, so I would
know
say
you're not supposed to have favorites, but
no, I'm not supposed to have favorites, but there's two very different ones that come to mind, and one will always stay with me because it was a very close friend of ours, and they always say, you know, don't kind of be careful about working with your friends. But this particular friend was getting married and had lost her dad. And we'd had lots and lots of conversations about how this was going to be such a tricky time for her. And she was obviously very anxious about walking down the aisle without her dad. And we had lots of conversations, and she was adamant that she wanted us to create the stationery. And they were having quite a rustic vibe. Sheffield's amazing for sort of industrial spaces, which I adore and love. And they were having a really sort of rustic vibe and wanted to include an image of a stag's head on the stationery. Where we were doing that, and we were kind of putting that together. And as we were doing it, I was talking to Toby about her dad, and he was such a party animal. I mean, he was just a legend. You go to a party and he would just take over the dance floor. He was amazing, and he would always tie his tie around his head. And as we were creating the stationery, Toby started sketching a tie around the stag's head. And I was looking at this thinking, I know where we're going here, and I'm not sure how this is going to pan out. And I didn't tell her, and we sent her the drafts, and it was very subtle. And she turned the invite over, and on the back was this stag's head with this tiny little tie around its antlers. And we all cried. And that sort of little emblem appeared all the way through the wedding day. So it was on menus, and it was on their table stationery and things. And it just stays with me because I often think little markers like that are like, they're symbols, but they're so much more than that, aren't they? And that one is always like sort of forefront of my mind because I know how special it was to her. And then others I just think are special because they are so tied in with what we love to do, which is beautiful typography. It's just love, and it doesn't date. It's not one of those things where we create something and think we're doing this because it's super fashionable, it's super trendy. So we did a beautiful Art Deco invite for someone who was getting married on Brighton Bandstand. So that was really beautiful, and it was one of those, a lot of our couples are the same in that they just say, there you go, you take control. They don't micromanage. And it's an era that I love, and yeah, it was just a beautiful day, and one of my favorite pieces that we created. It was lovely, really lovely.
Oh, amazing. I felt really teary with the
story. I know, same here. Yeah, it gets me every time. Yeah.
How lovely that you were able to sort of have that nod to somebody.
Yeah.
Stationery. Like you just don't.
Yeah.
It doesn't even sound like something that's possible.
No. Yeah.
Absolutely,
exactly.
It was possible.
Yeah.
How fantastic. I'm sure your friend is eternally grateful for the foresight of that design. Yeah. When you get the inquiry, lands in your inbox, and I think you've probably just touched on it there with your Brighton Bandstand. What gets you most excited? How do you know, this is a great inquiry?
Yeah. So lots of things get me excited, but I think the biggest thing is where they're getting married. So I'm instantly, because we are in Sheffield, a lot of our couples are northern. They're not far from where we are, so I know a lot of the venues anyway. But when they tell me where they're getting married, I'm like, oh, yes, like I'm gonna love doing this one. And we do have, like I said to you before, some amazing different spaces in Sheffield, which just lend themselves so well to what we do. And I think you glean so much from couples from where they choose to get married. I think you can tell so much about who they are and their kind of personality from where they've chosen to get married. So I think the venue is the thing that gets me like super excited. And then when I hear like who their other suppliers are, and you start kind of connecting with them and looking at what they do, and you're like, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. So, and just them being excited gets you excited too, doesn't it? Just whole, they just can't wait to get cracking, can they? And we're often one of the first people that they will have been in contact with after their venue, so they're still sort of in that early sort of phase. So I love that. I just love that those first inquiries are great, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. That's that, especially at the moment, you know, where people are there's such a lot of relief around being able to reach out to a supplier and talk about a wedding that is going to go ahead.
exactly completely.
Like excitement factor 1 million.
Yes, 1 million.
I'm a big fan of paper products and stationery. In fact, in my corporate life, I actually work for a stationery company.
Ah, okay.
I know, so I'm a bit of a geek. I know the paper that I like, and I know the pens that I like. And actually, I can't imagine my life without stationery because of that. You know, a day out at Paper Chase is a day that I'm excited to go to.
Oh my God. So palpitations thinking about it.
But I am also aware of the like environmental connotations of using paper and printed products, and I know that there's, for some people, a move towards digital. Where do you sit on that, and what are your sort of thoughts and feelings around moving to digital from paper invitations?
It's a very tricky one, and I think particularly at this time for couples who are planning a wedding during a pandemic and don't want to commit to paper, I get it. I'm hearing a lot more kind of digital requests, and I think, like I say, I think in this climate, I get it, I understand it. However, I also think, you know, taking COVID out of the situation in normal times, if you're a paper lover, you're a paper lover, and 100%. There's no there isn't a lot that people can convince you of otherwise to move to digital. So I think those people are always going to be those people. It's the same, you know, with the Kindle and a book. You know, those people who don't want to read a Kindle won't, and those who love paper will stay with paper. And actually, for weddings, there are a lot of elements that don't work digitally. I was talking to someone the other day who said that they'd had, a few years ago, they'd had an email invite, and it just gets lost within the emails. And they were kind of trawling through their emails trying to find this invite to get the details. And when they did find it, they printed it off. And I was like, well, they kind of like, you know, not the point, is it? No. But it doesn't work in that sense, because it just got sort of lost amongst, you know, all of their other stuff within their emails. I mean, in terms of the eco side, there are so many options now, and that's going to grow and grow and grow. And I always say to our couples as well, I'm not going to sell you stuff that you don't need. You know, if you don't need an information card, you don't need an RSVP card. I'm not going to say you must have endless items. You know, you do need to be sensible about it and think about what you actually need. So I think if you want to go digital, you'll do that anyway. You would have done that anyway. I was in the attic the other day and I found this tiny postcard. I mean, it was like dinky. And it was from Toby's granddad, and he'd sent it to his grandma when he was in the RAF. And it had this beautiful little message on it, and I've got it in here. And I just said to Toby, like, that is forever. Like, you are never, you know, we still have that. They've long gone, and we still have that, and we will look at that every day. You never get that sense with digital.
No.
Digital messages, it's just not the same connection. So for me, I have questioned whether we should be doing digital invites, but it's not something that I really want to kind of pursue at this time. It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one.
It is, but I think your rationale there is absolutely on the money. People who want to do that will do that and go and find the supplier who does that.
Of course.
People who don't will come and talk to you guys. I actually, like, honestly, if I had to write my top 100 things that I experience in life, one of them 100% would be receiving nice post. And nothing makes me happier. And in fact, you sent me a card recently and it made me so happy. So it's still up in my living room, actually.
Good.
It just makes me so happy. It's like someone is there without being there. And if it is designed, you know, when you tune into this idea of sending a wedding invitation, it acts as a trigger to so many things. And actually coming out of lockdown and pandemic year and going into live events, I just think it's going to be the marker that when that envelope lands on your doorstep that invites you to an event with actual human beings that you can actually hug. I mean,
I know, exactly.
I need that post in my life.
Yeah, completely. And I was thinking about when we used to go to this, when me and my sister used to go to this stationery shop that my grandpa used to take us to. And we spent a lot of time with my grandparents in the holidays, and he would give us £1. We would think it was like £1 million. And he would allow us to go to this stationery shop in Derbyshire. And he would stand outside and go in with my grandma. And he'd just say, go and spend your £1 on whatever stationery you would like. And we would go in there thinking we were like, I don't know, in like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or something. Like, it was just the most incredible experience. Or, you know, buying a card or buying, like you say, a beautiful, you know, oh gosh, those pads that you used to have with the lines on that you used to write on. And then going home with our little bundle of stationery and then writing letters to like my grandparents and then passing them over to them in little envelopes and things. That to me is an emotional connection which you just don't get, I don't think, in digital. I love it. I just love stationery.
I mean, gosh, if we get that, like, we could just geek out all day on this.
Exactly.
Hannah, you've talked about your beloved Toby.
Oh, bless him.
You're married. Tell us about your wedding, and if you did it all over again, is there anything you'd change about it?
So we, as you know, are from Sheffield, but we didn't get married in Sheffield. We actually chose to get married in Brighton. So Toby has quite a small family, and we wanted to kind of take our family and our friends to Brighton because most of them hadn't ever been, and we'd spent a lot of time there. My niece and nephew are there, his sister's there, and we just knew that our friends would absolutely love it. So it was small, relatively small. We got everybody down for a full weekend, and we all stayed in quite close proximity to each other. And then we went to, we had the wedding at the town hall in Brighton, which I'd never seen. We'd never been in it. We'd never even seen the room. We just had some photos sent to us, and I was like, that looks great. I had a little tuk-tuk pick me up from the hotel. Brilliant. Which I just loved. In fact, I think that was probably the best bit. Like, people sort of waving at you in the tuk-tuk and wishing you luck. That was lovely. So we had a close sort of small ceremony in the town hall, which was beautiful, actually, as it turned out. Just good, yep. And then we did a little tour. We took our guests on a big red bus, and they did a tour of the seafront, which they absolutely loved, apparently. We went off and had photos by the beach huts. And then we had a lovely reception at a little restaurant, which we had the whole restaurant. and I'd obviously given strict instructions of how I would like it to decorate.
Really?
Yeah, no, it's funny, isn't it? And my sister was there on hand checking every detail, as was my bridesmaid. And it was lovely because it was just the people that we love the most. It was, like I say, it was very small, really, in the grand scheme of things, and just massive party. So music's really important to both of us. Toby's obsessed with all things music, so DJ was fantastic, and it was just, yeah, it was a bit of a riot at the end, to be honest.
Brilliant. Sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was great. In terms of changing things, I think because we got married in Brighton, there were certain people that couldn't be there, and I think looking back, that makes me a little bit sad. But you know, of course, we caught up afterwards. But I think it was tricky. It's just a long way from us. And maybe I think also trying to sort of, I was so stressed out about the whole thing because I wasn't Sheffield, because I didn't really know what was going to happen. There were so many elements to the day where it could have gone really wrong.
Yeah.
So I wish on the run up I'd just have enjoyed it a bit more, because on the day I was super chilled.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And finally, for the thing I really, really regret is not having a videographer. I would have loved a film of the wedding. I really would have.
That's probably the number one answer I get when I ask that question.
I really do. I don't really know why we didn't. And now I think, I mean, don't get me wrong, the photographs are beautiful, and you know, kind of who we chose to photograph was like sort of non-negotiable. We knew who we wanted. We knew photographs were the most important thing. But yeah, I just think sometimes when people say that they watch their wedding video on their anniversary, I'm like, oh, I want to do that. You can't have everything though, can you?
No, well, it sounds like an amazing day.
It was brilliant.
It sounds really you as well, and I think
it was fun. It was fun. 10 years this year.
Oh, congratulations!
What should we do
in a pandemic?
Exactly.
Last question, and then I'll let you go. You're, as with all of my podcast guests, you're a member of the Wedding Business Club. Tell me about your experience as a member so far. Oh, golly.
Gosh, where can I start? So, obviously, I joined last year, and I can honestly say that it has just transformed the way that we do things. I have to say, most days when I'm doing anything, I'm always in the back of my mind thinking, what would Faye do? Would Faye do this? You're kind of like on my shoulder all the time. It's just the most amazing community of people who are so ready to champion one another, support one another. There's no judgment. And then you have you kind of at the helm, who is just beautiful, awe-inspiring, inspirational, fabulous, wonderful person, and we all love you so much. I just can't imagine not I don't know what we did before I was here. Like, it seems like a time I don't remember that time, and it has transformed what we do. It's just kind of taken us a sort of a notch, kind of guided us to where we sort of knew we needed to go, but didn't really know how to get there.
Yeah.
I just love it. I'm never leaving.
Hannah. Yeah. Stay forever.
I'm here forever.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I'm terrible at taking feedback. I'm like, gosh. But that means, genuinely, it means the world to me. That's music to my ears. That's what I want to hear people say. And Hannah, you know, you had already a successful business, and you know, all I ever really want to do is facilitate people's growth. And that's
well, you do, but you do so much more.
Yeah. Thank you, Hannah. Now listen, if people are listening to this podcast and thinking, now she sounds like the type of person I would like to either do my wedding stationery or help me with my brand and my website, how do people, the best way for people to get in touch with you?
So you can find us on Instagram at Bonnie Clyde Wedding or Bonnie Clyde Design. That's where you'll find us most often. And then you can message us there. There's all the links to how you get in touch with us on sites on our sites. So one thing I would say, which I actually meant to mention earlier, is, you know, when we were saying about branding, okay, branding is not good enough. So you'll find our Bonnie and Clyde design site is under construction because it's just not working for me. So yeah, but that doesn't matter. We can, you know, there's lots of ways to find us, but Instagram is our main kind of place.
Fantastic. And good news that you practice what you preach, because so many people do not. Hannah, seriously, thank you. I could talk to you for 1,000 years longer. It's been an absolute pleasure. You're just so lovely and warm and open and sharing, and it's been a delight to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Faye. I've loved every second.
Thanks.